Now let's welcome our speaker. No one can predict the future, but Jack Uldrich can help you prepare for it. Jack is a leading futurist, author, and speaker who helps organizations gain the crucial foresight they need to create a successful future. His work is based on the transformational principles of unlearning or freeing yourself from obsolete knowledge and assumptions as a strategy to survive and thrive in an era of unparalleled change. Jack regularly makes television appearances on the Science Channel, Discovery Channel, and a frequent guest on major media outlets, including CNN, CNBC, and National Public Radio. Jack urges that creativity and action are more powerful and versatile than knowledge. He's here today to share his energy, anecdotes, and thoughtful business as personal advice to educate, entertain, and inspire you. Please welcome Jack Uldrich.
So thank you for that introduction, Ken. So the title of my presentation is The Big Aha, and it's all about how to future-proof the wall and ceiling industry. And I'm going to cut right to the chase and tell you what the big aha is, because I like everyone to take away a big aha from every talk I give. And it's an acronym. And what AHA stands for is awareness, humility, and action. And I submit to you that these three principles are going to help you future-proof your business against what's coming next. But now, before I get into my presentation, I know one of the most common questions is, well, what do you do, Jack? What does a futurist do? And that's a great question, but rather than tell you what I do, I want to show you what I do. And I know that some of you have already seen this video, but that's okay. I'm going to show it to you again anyways. What I want you to do is I want you to count the number of times people in the white shirt pass the ball. Whoever gets the correct answer is going to get a signed copy of my latest book. So does everyone understand the task? Okay, here we go. Count the number of times people in the white shirt pass the ball. Okay, how many people counted 15? Anyone count 15? Okay, so some of you, what about 16? More of you? Okay, what about 17? Okay, everyone who said 16, please stand up. Remain standing. 16 is, in fact, the correct answer. Now, unfortunately, I don't have books for all of you, but I have a tie-breaking question, but only those of you who counted 16 can participate in the tie-breaking question, but whomever I see raise their hand first with the correct answer to this follow-on question will get the book. So of the people standing, who could identify all three changes in that video? There were three quite distinct. Who saw two of the people standing? Who saw the most obvious? People standing. Yes, sir. The gorilla. Congratulations. Well done. I will get you the book afterwards, sir. So 1 out of 3, that's not bad, but how many other people saw the gorilla? And I want you to be honest. So it looks like about 20% of you. But even those of you who saw the gorilla, there are a couple of things that you missed. Those of you who didn't even see the gorilla, let me show you everything that you missed. And this is, in fact, the exact same video.
Let's rewind and watch it again. Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold.
So I told you I was going to show you what a futurist does. Look, I gave all of you an incentive to focus on a very specific task. Count the balls, you're going to win the book. My guess is, regardless of whatever your specific professional responsibilities are within the wall and ceiling industry, you are focused like a laser on that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's what you should be doing. But as a futurist, I have the luxury of stepping back and looking at the big picture. And the first thing I like to remind my audience is there is, in fact, the equivalent of an 800-pound gorilla that's coming front and center into our lives, beating his chest, only it is in the form of new emerging technologies. But we need to be aware of these new emerging technologies. Why? Because of these emerging technologies, certain jobs, certain industries are going to disappear in the very near future. It's kind of like the person in the black shirt just walking away. Difficult to see this transformation, but I'm here to tell you it's coming. But beyond that, because of all of this technological change, customer behavior and business models are changing in some really subtle ways. It's like the curtain changing color. It's difficult to see all of this transformation. But if we want to future-proof ourselves for tomorrow, the first thing we all need to do is just become aware of how much is happening right before our very eyes that we're just not paying attention to. And I'm going to help you show these things that I think you should be paying closer attention to. But because this is your 100th anniversary, as a futurist, I actually love to study history because I think it's really can be illustrative as to what is coming next. And I recently came across this photo. This is New York City, and it's in the year 1900, so a little before you were first founded. But if you look closely, this is Fifth Avenue. Every vehicle on that road is a horse-drawn carriage, except for one. It's one of the world's first automobiles, and there it is. Now, this is the exact same street just 13 years later. They're all automobiles, except for one. There's a holdover. It's an old horse-drawn carriage. I think we can all agree that that was a period of profound technological change. Well, I submit to you, folks, in the next decade, we're going to see a comparable amount of change. And whether we like it or not, we're all in the horse industry. Our world is going to change a lot, and we need to be aware of it. But I want to give you confidence that you're going to be able to navigate this future, because as I was going through your 100-year yearbook, I came across this early photo of McNulty Brothers, a plastering company. They were early on to leverage the new automobile, and I think that you're going to leverage a lot of these new technologies to continue to grow your industry in the future. But if you don't believe the world is changing fast, let me just walk you through the last couple of weeks and months. Just a couple of weeks ago, KATERRA, a new building company, received $900 million in venture capital funding. And here's what they're already doing, and tell me that the construction industry isn't about to change. They're building that building in 17 days using advances in artificial intelligence, big data, robotic technology, 3D printing. The world is changing, and we need to be aware of it. So that was just a couple of weeks ago. A couple of months ago, if any of you are out in Seattle, you can now go to this grocery store out in Seattle, and here's what you can do.
No lines, no checkouts, no registers. Welcome to Amazon Go.
You just walk into a store, grab whatever you want, and walk out without ever interacting with a clerk. Now, this isn't just going to transform the retail industry. It's going to transform the expectations of your clients and customers and the people living and working in your buildings. If they can go into a grocery store and have things happen to that quickly, that conveniently, their expectations when they start walking into schools, when they walk into hotels, when they walk into their houses, are literally going to go through the roof. Your customers are going to have new expectations a lot sooner than I think a lot of people really appreciate. But then, this was just about 6 weeks ago. I'm not sure how many of you go to the Consumer Electronics Show out in Las Vegas, but Samsung came out with this. It's a 146-inch beast, and it's literally called the Wall.
That they announced called the Wall. Now this is 146 inches of television. It is insanely big. It's never going to fit in your lounge room, and if it does, it replaces the entire wall. It's amazing, it's beautiful, it's modular, which means it's made up of smaller screens all stitched together basically, and it's gorgeous. That's my Uber behind me. I've got to go.
So here's my point, is that that's really expensive today, but like all electronics, it's probably going to get better, faster, more affordable. So what is the expectation of walls in the very near future? I suspect it's going to be different than how we think of walls today. We just have to be aware of these trends. Why? Because they're already here, but they're going to grow exponentially more powerful. And this idea of exponential growth is really critical to helping you understand the future. And this is a theme of a book I wrote a couple of years ago called Jump the Curve. And when I was writing the book, I came across a great quote from Einstein. And decades ago, he said to technologists, he said, if you can't explain what you're working on to a 6-year-old child, you're a fraud. I thought, hey, that's a really good test. Just so happens, when the book came out, my son Sean was only 6 years old. So I wanted to see if he could understand what I meant by jump the curve, because I need you to understand this concept. And I didn't know how to do this, but one day he came to me, he was really excited. He'd lost his first tooth. I thought, ooh, I'm going to teach my son how to jump the curve. So I said to him, imagine the tooth fairy comes to you this evening and gives you 2 different options for your teeth. And it's a fact, all babies have 20 teeth. Option number 1, tooth fairy is going to give you $5 per tooth. Now look, I'm a pretty cheap guy, so I said, look, son, this is just a hypothetical example. I'm not telling the Tooth Fairy is going to bring you $5. But I go, assume that that's one option. The second option is Tooth Fairy brings you a penny for your first tooth, 2 for your second, 4 for your third. That penny doubles 20 times. Which one are you going to take? Well, without batting an eye, my son goes, I'm taking the $5, Dad. That'd be $100 in total. I go, okay, fair enough. Do you, however, know how much your 20th tooth under the penny doubling would be worth? As a 6-year-old, he sheepishly said no. I go, well, as your old man, I'm about to tell you, it would have been worth $5,242.88. To which he promptly said, no way. I said, yes way. And then I said, son, I'm going to introduce you to the pleasures of plotting and graphing. And we then plotted out that penny doubling in graph format. And early on, it looks insignificant. 2 pennies, 4, 8, doesn't look like it's going anywhere. But after just 20 doublings, that curve shoots up to over $5,000. So if my son would have wanted to understand the implications of the Tooth Fairy's offer, he'd have had to jump that exponential curve. That's why a 6-year-old boy needs to know how to jump the curve. The reason you need to know how to jump the curve, today, no fewer than 10 technological forces continue to double. It's computer processing power, it's data storage, it's bandwidth, it's sequencing of genomes, advances in biotechnology, nanotechnology, robotics, 3D printing, sensor technology, the collection of data. All of these trends, they're not increasing linearly, they're increasing exponentially. So if we really want to think about the future of the wall and ceiling industry, we all need to jump that curve, because that's where the future is going to take place. Now let me give you the epitome of someone who jumps the curve. And this is Reed Hastings. Some of you might know him. He's the CEO of Netflix. But he's sort of a fascinating case study. 20 years ago, he wanted to start a business. And what he wanted to do 20 years ago is he wanted to send movies through the mail. Well, that didn't work 20 years ago. Why? Because they were big, fat, clunky VHS cassettes. But there was one trend that was doubling every 6 months, and it was data storage. And he said, oh, I can't do much with it in 1995, but around 1999, data storage is going to get so good, we're going to start putting movies on DVDs. And once they get that small and thin, I can pop them in the mail and start a really successful business. And that's exactly what he did. But then it gets more interesting. In 2005, he jumped the curve again. He said, oh, bandwidth is doubling in capacity every 6 months. I can't do anything with that today, but around 2011, we're going to be able to start doing what with movies? Stream them. He jumped the curve again, and that's what he started doing. Now, I want to go back to this idea of exponential growth. Those trends of the data storage doubling and bandwidth should have been obvious to other people in the industry, but for whatever reason, they were not able to adjust to the future. And this next photo needs no explanation, does it? There should have been senior executives who said, our world is changing, we have to start doing things differently. My friends, this is the fate we all want to avoid. And to avoid it, we're going to have to jump the curve. But I tell you, here's where it gets really interesting. 2012, he jumped the curve again. He said, oh, bandwidth is going to continue to get better. In fact, it's going to get really cheap. And soon, everyone else, Amazon, Google, others, they're all going to be streaming movies. So what did Netflix start doing just 5 years ago? Any of you know? Well, they started producing their own content, House of Cards, Stranger Things, and just last week, more people spend more time on Netflix than all cable television together. This is why we need to think differently about the future, and we might need to think about different business models and moving into different areas. For 100 years, you might have been thinking of your industry from one perspective, but the future, open up your perspective, you're going to see some new opportunities. Now, the next thing I want to do, another way I want to help you think like a futurist is this. I know it's not really fair right after lunch to begin asking you math questions, but who could tell me the mathematical relationship between these numbers? 1,000, million, billion, trillion, quadrillion? Anyone? Yeah, each one is 1,000 times larger than the next. The reason I show you these numbers is I want to go back to this idea of exponential growth. If something doubles 10 times, it's not 10 times as big. Through the power of exponential growth, it's 1,000 times as big. We go from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64 to 128 to 256 to 512 to 1,024. So if a technology doubles 10 times, and they're going to be a number that do in just the next decade, it doesn't mean they're going to increase tenfold. It means we're going to see 1,000-fold increase. Now, undoubtedly, some of you are thinking to yourself, we're not going to see any 1,000-fold increase. You know what? Before I talk to you at all about the future, let's just step back to your 80th anniversary. I want to see how many of you can recognize this sound from 1998. How many of you can vaguely place that sound? Any of you? Some of you might be able to recognize it. That was or is a 56K modem. And it's how we accessed the internet just 8,000 days ago. But all technologists have achieved in the last 8,000 days is a 1,400-fold improvement in bandwidth capacity. And my guess is virtually each and every one of you already has a smartphone on your possession. My point, you're navigating that new tool fine, and it should open your mind to the possibility that if you've lived through that 1,000-fold increase, that there might be some other 1,000-fold increases that are coming your way. So what might some of these 1,000-fold increases be? Well, the first one is, perhaps surprisingly, is mobility and bandwidth isn't going to slow down anytime soon. In most major American cities, we already have 4G speeds. Well, what 4G speeds is allowing is something called augmented reality, the idea that we're going to layer digital information on top of the physical world. Let me just show you how ThyssenKrupp, the German manufacturer, is already leveraging augmented reality, and I want you to think about this in terms of training your next generation workers.
As soon as the technician puts on his HoloLens, he already sees, I have a call here, I need to go to this elevator, and then actually sees a 3D picture of the elevator that he's going to work on, and that he can zoom into a part that will offer you also training opportunities.
So that's pretty cool, but I'm here to tell you it's not going to slow down. Within the next couple of years, by 2020, just the next 2 years, most major American cities are going to have 5G speeds. And doesn't that sound like a nice incremental increase? Oh, we're just going from 4G to 5G. That's no big deal. Yeah, folks, it is. 5G going to be 100-fold faster. So what are we going to be able to do with 100-fold faster? Well, we might start leading into some really weird and potentially creepy areas. I just want to show you this example. I just came across it last week. Intel is now working on a new pair of smart glasses, and here's what they do.
What's amazing about these glasses is they look normal, and they feel really light in my head. They only weigh about 50 grams. They're designed to do just one thing, show you simple, basic information in one of your eyes. It has this little red monochrome projector that shines an image on a holographic mirror thing, which then bounces it directly into my eyeball. So I don't have to focus on it, it's just sort of down there.
Digital information being projected directly onto our retinas. That's where we are today, folks. You don't think that this is only going to get better? But again, I want you to understand this in the context of a worker. I mean, if they could have information right there on their eyes, then their hands are free. Suddenly, they might be significantly safer. What are the workplace safety implications of a tool like this? This is what you need to be aware of, and you need to be figuring out how you might be able to leverage some of these things to achieve the goals that we all want to achieve, and that is worker safety. Now, the next trend you need to be aware of, this trend has actually been doubling since 1986, and that's when the world's first 3D printer came out. Well, I'm not sure how many of you saw this. Over in Amsterdam, they're now 3D printing a bridge. So that's pretty cool. But up in Canada, this company is now 3D printing steel studs today. So maybe how you get some of your supplies is going to change in the near future as a result of this Canadian company. But here's another example of 3D printing. This company is now operational out in California, and here's what they're doing with 3D printers, and tell me that it might not transform the construction industry.
The walls of this house were printed entirely on site. This is the world's first actually printed house.
3D printed houses are already a reality. And just last week in Austin, Texas, they're now 3D printing houses for the homeless for $6,000. Our world is changing. These printers are only going to get better, faster, more affordable, and they're going to start printing with different types of materials. Whether we like it or not, we need to be aware of these trends. The fourth trend you need to be aware of, this is advances in nanotechnology or material science. Here's how I want you to think about this. 5 years ago, $100 million a year industry, peanuts in the global economy. In the next 5 years, it has the potential to be $100 billion a year global industry. From 100 million to 100 billion, that's another one of these 1,000-fold increases that, like that gorilla, are walking front and center into our lives and might change our world. So what might some of these advances in material science be? Well, just last year, Nissan came out with a self-cleaning car that'll never have to go to a car wash. Well, that's pretty cool. But down in Mexico City, they now have self-cleaning materials on the exterior of buildings that are scrubbing carbon dioxide out of the environment and helping keep Mexico City just a little bit cleaner. So how we start thinking about the exterior of our buildings in a world of nanotechnology, it's already changing, but this trend in the technology is only going to get better. Here's another nanomaterial some of you might be familiar with. It's called aerogel. It's an amazing nanomaterial. It has anywhere from 10 to 40 times both the insulating and acoustic properties of any material currently on the market. So when we start building energy-efficient buildings and your clients want different acoustics, aerogels and other nanomaterials are something that you're going to have to be aware of. But here's another material that could really revolutionize our world really quickly. And 10 years ago, it was discovered. It's called graphene. It has a lot of amazing properties. But here's what it might allow us to do within the next couple of years. And then let me try and help you connect the dots. So because of graphene, here's what we might be able to do with battery technology.
Like electric vehicles. Now you pull into a gas station. Well, you'd pull into a charging station, and within a minute, it would charge up your car.
Because of graphene, you might be able to charge up an electric vehicle, not in 4 to 8 hours, which is what it takes today, but in less than 30 seconds, faster than you can refuel your existing automobile. Now, in that world, it might not matter that gasoline stays at $2.40 a gallon, and suddenly the number of electric vehicles increases. But I think for you, the advances in battery technology are going to revolutionize the world and how we think of particularly walls. Elon Musk recently came out with this new battery. It's called the Power Wall, and it's actually a battery that people put in their house to recharge their cars and to soak up the energy that the solar panels are collecting. But might that battery be able to be incorporated directly into the wall in the future? Yeah, I think that's a real possibility. I don't want to say it'll be here tomorrow, but in the near future, it is a possibility, and we all need to be aware of it. The fifth trend you need to be aware of, advances in robotics. I'm just going to show you a couple of clips. This one is creepy, but it just sort of shows you how advanced robotic technology is today. All right, so that's a little creepy. But now let me give you a more practical example of robotic technology and how it might affect your industry and help keep your workers safer, or maybe keep some of your aging workforce in the workforce a little bit longer. We're now creating exoskeletons, sort of wearable robotic suits. And watch what this fellow's able to do with this Milwaukee grinder.
I could even heft a 40-pound grinder like a sword.
And the whole premise is that we provide a parallel load path.
So something like that, suddenly worker comp costs might go down. Or again, that individual who's 50, 55 years old and has been busting their hump for the last 40 years of their life, technology might allow them to stay in the workforce a couple of years longer. But here's how I really want you to think about robotic technology. Of course, there are already self-driven robotic trucks and cars on the road. I'm not sure how many of you saw this. This is just from 6 weeks ago. A self-driven truck drove itself from Long Beach, California, all the way to Jacksonville, Florida, by itself. So the very day that came out, ironically, I was in Nashville speaking to the trucking industry, which then got me to thinking about the country song of the future, which leads me to believe that in the country song of the future, not only is the guy's wife and dog going to leave him, even his truck is going to leave him in the future. So that's a little lighthearted, but of course it is no joke that the possibility that the most common job in 31 US states is truck drivers, and the possibility that a significant number of them could be out of work in a decade's time is a real possibility. And regardless of your political affiliations, it's something that we as a society should be thinking about. But it might also represent an opportunity for you to begin retraining some of those workers into your industry. So wherever there's a problem, try and flip it on its head and say, what's the opportunity? How do we start doing things differently? But then to just help you understand how weird the future is going to be, sometimes it helps to appreciate how weird things are today. I came across this photo just a while back. It's a self-driven truck delivering self-driven cars to Phoenix, Arizona. And as many of you know, in spite of the tragedy that happened 9 days ago when the first self-driven car killed its first pedestrian, this technology is getting really good. Let me just show you the number of miles that have been driven in autonomous vehicles. The technology only started 9 years ago, but like all exponential trends, the number of miles driven in those vehicles started slow. It wasn't until we reached about a year ago this time, 1 million miles. By May, we were already up to 3 million miles. Today, we're up to 30 million miles. And again, in spite of that accident that just happened, I think that there's a real possibility that we're going to go from 3 million miles to 3 billion miles to 3 trillion miles a lot sooner than people expect. And as that happens, the automotive industry changes, the transportation industry changes, and how we begin thinking and designing cities changes. And as that changes, how we think about buildings is going to change. I don't want to say that this future is inevitable, but I think the trends are pretty powerful, and we at least have to be aware and remind ourselves the world can change fast. Again, I just want you to go back to that picture of 1900. My guess is there are a lot of people who said in the horse industry, oh yeah, cars, they're going to get better, but we have 40, 50, 100 years. They didn't. They had a decade, and their world changed. History reminds us that change can happen fast, and we have to be aware of it. But now let me just show you another practical advance. This is robotic technology, and again, it relates specifically to your industry. There are already robotic technologies that are laying bricks, which is pretty impressive. I'm just going to show you this little clip. This technology has the potential, like many others, of getting better, faster, and more affordable. And as it does, our world can change, and we need to be aware of these things. The sixth trend you need to be aware of, another 1,000-fold increase. This is known as the Internet of Things. This is the idea that we're going to start putting tiny computer chips into physical objects and connect those physical objects to the internet. This is going to be a huge opportunity, but this is a nebulous idea, the Internet of Things. So here's how I want you to understand the Internet of Things. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And some of you might remember 10 years ago we had the tragic bridge collapse. Well, that bridge was rebuilt in record time, but when we rebuilt it, we embedded 400 sensors into that building, or into that bridge. So it's a super smart bridge connected to the internet. It can tell us traffic flow, temperature, pressure, vibration, all sorts of things. Which might then beg the question, well, if that's a super smart bridge, what's a super dumb bridge? Well, here, my friends, is a super dumb bridge. And we have hundreds of thousands of them all across North America. But now, I do not know whether President Trump will be able to reach across the aisle and work with Democrats on a national infrastructure bill. But if they do, I really hope that they think about making our physical infrastructure ready for the 21st century. Because we shouldn't just have smart bridges, we should have smart roads, smart road signs, all sorts of other things. But let me just show you how the Internet of Things is already affecting your industry. Some of you might know this. This is the world's smartest, greenest building. It went operational 2 years ago over in Amsterdam. It's called The Edge. It's Deloitte's new corporate headquarters. 28,000 sensors in that building. But because of those 28,000 sensors, you know how much they've been able to slash energy consumption in that building? 85%. But here's the other thing. Because it is so smart, and Deloitte's workforce is so mobile, 2,500 people are headquartered out of that building. But do all 2,500 need an office and a desk and a computer every day? No, they don't. They just need to access space. So had Deloitte had to build that building just 10 years ago, it would have had to physically been twice the size, with twice the real estate, with twice the construction cost. But today, because it is so smart and it makes the most efficient use of space, they're able to slash real estate costs by 50% and construction costs by 50%. This is how the Internet of Things is going to affect you. But the opportunity is we're going to start retrofitting buildings. We're going to start making schools and hospitals and office complexes and apartments and residential homes smart and energy efficient, and that might represent a huge opportunity for a lot of you. The next trend you need to be aware of, advances in artificial intelligence. And let me just give you one practical example of artificial intelligence. Just a couple of months ago, this company popped up. It's called SmartVid.io, and it's all about leveraging artificial intelligence specifically for the construction industry. And all they do is they use camera and sensor technology to scan work sites, and if a worker isn't wearing a helmet, or if there isn't a rail on a certain set of steps, it immediately notifies someone about that safety violation. It's like a job inspector that never sleeps. So again, you might think that artificial intelligence is something that isn't going to affect your industry or doesn't, you're a small or mid-sized company, how are you going to leverage artificial intelligence? You don't have to be the experts. There are companies out there trying to help you and keep your workers safe today, and you need to leverage these technologies today. Another trend we need to be aware of, it's growing exponentially. The amount of data we're collecting on our workers, on ourselves, on our buildings, on our bridges, is growing exponentially. And every business needs to understand you're in the data business. And let me give you the best example of a company who understands it's all about data. And this won't surprise anyone. It's Amazon. But could I just see a show of hands? How many of you already have an Amazon Echo in your house? I mean, look around. That's remarkable. Close to 25% of you already have artificial intelligence in your home, and the technology's only 2 years old. But every time you interact with that Amazon Echo, what are they doing? They're collecting a little more digital data dust on you. And here's what they want to do with all that data. And they've said it publicly, and they said it on 60 Minutes recently.
Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get from us.
Anything you want on Earth, you're going to get for us.
That's where we're headed, I believe.
Anything. Folks, that's a pretty big umbrella. They don't just say books or consumer items. They say anything. And they're now collecting so much data on their customers that their end goal is to know what you and I want before we even know what we want. But when they say everything, they mean everything. Just 3 months ago, they started providing $15,000 houses on Amazon. And then just 3 weeks ago, they said, hey, we're getting into banking. A lot of people can't even afford that. We're going to start financing them. So suddenly they're getting into the banking industry. When they say everything, they mean everything. But my point is about a world of data, you're going to have to think about your competitors from a different perspective. That the people who understand data, I think, are going to be those that prosper in the future. Now, you might remember I said the title of this presentation was The Big Aha, and I said that the H stood for humility. And what I mean here is we all need humility to the idea that what worked well yesterday in our business might not be sufficient moving forward. I'm going to give you a little test for humility. What I want all of you to do, and this will only work for those of you who are from America or Canada, those of you from international areas, you're exempt from this little question. But if you're from North America, I want you to just turn to your table mate and answer for your table mate. In your US state or your province in Canada, what two colors are the yield sign? Go ahead, tell the person next to you what two colors the yield sign is. Okay, I have heard the answer. So those of you who said yellow or yellow and black, congratulations. Could I see a show of hands? Well done. Unfortunately, that was the correct answer up until 1971. The yield sign has been red and white since Richard Nixon was in your White House, or was in the White House. And now if I'm doing my math right, that means at your 54th anniversary, the last 46, they've all been red and white. Inevitably, some of you go, no way, that's not true. Yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. The first yield sign you see after leaving the Dolphin is going to be red and white, and curiously enough, every other one all the way home is going to be red and white. Inevitably, I know one or two of you are going to want to pigeonhole me and say, well, in my rural area of Ohio, they're still yellow. No, they're not. And they haven't been yellow and black anywhere in North America for 4 decades. But to me, this is a great metaphor for humility. Look, it is a fact that many of us, when we were first learning to drive, yield signs were still yellow and black. The problem is that old, crappy information has just stayed stuck in our head, even in the face of overwhelming visual evidence to the contrary. We've been zipping by these signs for 4 decades, and it just hasn't processed. My message and the metaphor to you is, look, there are certain things you learned about the wall and seal industry, your job, your customer, your business model, your competitors. Yeah, they were all true yesterday. It doesn't mean that they are still true today. Now, those of you who said yellow or yellow and black, I'm not done with you folks yet. If you're a little curious as to what your brain looks like, here's what your brain kind of looks like. Looked good back in the day, but might be time for a little mental wardrobe update. So that's a lighthearted example, and there's no great harm to the idea that you thought the yield sign was yellow, but it's been red and white for 4 decades. But let me give you another example of just how fast the world can change. And this doesn't relate specifically to your industry, but it does speak to how fast the world could change. If I was here just 10 years ago at your 90th anniversary and asked you, what color are taxis in most major American cities? What would we all have said just 10 years ago? Well, yeah, like the yield sign, they're yellow. But of course, is that true anymore? No. How many of you have already used Uber or Lyft in the past year? Now, here's what is amazing. Uber and Lyft could not have existed just 10 years ago. GPS, smartphones, cloud computing all existed 10 years ago, but they had not yet scaled exponentially and then converged to a point where what do Uber and Lyft really do? Well, they allow strangers to give strangers rides safely. That's what they do, and they're the basis of a $100 billion a year industry. But I know, like you, many of us, what were we told by our mothers when we were growing up? Never get into a car with a... And now we're doing it hundreds of millions of times. I mean, the world changes in some strange ways. But what Uber and Lyft represent is something called the sharing economy. Instead of owning an automobile, many young people, especially people in urban areas, are now just accessing cars. And that is known as the sharing economy. But here's how it's already affecting your industry. How many of you are familiar with WeWork? It is sort of the Airbnb of commercial office space. Many small businesses, instead of renting or owning their own property, they're just accessing it. And this is now North America's largest property company, and they own virtually no property. They're just leveraging new technologies to help people think about workspace in a fundamentally different way. Now, here's another metaphor. I came across this on one of my social media feeds a while back. I don't know who this guy is. He's a high school teacher. I suspect he's a great teacher. But for the last 40 years, for his school yearbook photo, he's been wearing the exact same sweater vest for his photo. And I thought that was hilarious. But then I thought, oh no, that's a great metaphor. And here's the metaphor. How often do we hear people say, well, I have 25, 30, or 40 years of experience in the wall and ceiling industry? And sometimes people truly do have 25, 30, 40 years experience. Sometimes, however, they have 1 year of experience repeated 25, 30, or 40 times. There are certain things some of us learned early in our career, and they worked, and we just kept doing them. And in a world of linear change, that's fine. To keep doing what worked yesterday will work again tomorrow. But in a world of exponential change, suddenly what worked yesterday isn't going to work tomorrow, and we need humility. And let me just give you an example. I want to go back to the sharing economy. And I want you to just soak your mind around this little factoid. I know that this is a unique audience, and most of you probably use your drills a lot more. Ken, you certainly do, based on that photo that I saw earlier. But most people use a drill 13 minutes their entire life. So the question of the future then becomes, does everyone on your city block, in your apartment complex, in your small town need to own a drill? No, they don't. They just need to access a drill. And this is what the sharing economy is about. And they're going to start doing this with automobiles, with drills, with lawnmowers, with snowblowers, with boats. And as this trend grows, it's going to transform the economy in some powerful ways, and we just need to be aware of these trends. It's not the world that you and I grew up in, but it's the world our kids and grandkids are growing up into, and they're going to do things differently. But let me just give you a concrete or a specific example of how the sharing economy could affect you today. There are already companies out there in the construction industry who say, you know, for a lot of your work, you don't need to own every piece of equipment you have. Maybe you just need to access some of this equipment for rare, unique jobs. You could be leveraging the sharing economy today to help you save money. My point is, these trends are already here today, but they're only going to grow more powerful. This is another great metaphor for humility. We recently celebrated the 10th anniversary of the iPhone. When the iPhone came out, here was Steve Ballmer's reaction. He was then CEO of Microsoft. Here's what he thought about the iPhone.
Steve Jobs goes to Macworld and he pulls out this iPhone. What was your first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard.
Doesn't appeal to business customers. Could I just see a show of hands? How many of you have an iPhone on your possession? So here's my point. Steve Ballmer is not a dumb man, and I don't mean to suggest that he is, but could he have benefited from a little humility? Absolutely. And I submit to all of you, we're all going to have some humility. Maybe you've already heard in my presentation ideas that sound ridiculous to you. 3D printed bridges, digital information on our retina, that's ridiculous. Again, you might be right, but maybe, just maybe, we should have a little humility, and we don't fully understand these technologies. But here's my point. You're going to hear other ideas in the very near future, and your likely reaction is going to be to dismiss them. Here's my advice. Being cynical about the future is just being lazy. What I don't like about cynics is they think they know the answer. Skeptics, however, and by all means, be skeptical of everything that I say and every trend I point. But what skeptics do is they keep an open mind and they keep asking questions. What don't I know? What aren't I seeing? How might my customers use this? How might this change my business model? Just have a little humility and stick with questions a little bit longer. But let me give you a technology that some people are dismissive of, and this is quantum computing. But here's where we are with quantum computing today, in 2018.
IBM is working on the biggest leap in computing ever. In a small, nondescript office in the basement of their research lab in Yorktown, New York, they're building a quantum computer, a machine that could provide answers in minutes to problems that would take regular computers years to crack.
I don't know. Problems that used to take years to crack are going to potentially be solved in minutes and then seconds. And one of the very first things they're putting quantum computers to work on doing is producing and generating next generation materials. And let me just show you this little material. It's now the world's lightest, strongest material. But might we produce materials that are even stronger and even lighter than that in the future? Yeah, it's a real possibility. And as these materials proliferate out, are they going to change how we think about walls and ceilings? Absolutely. And we just need to be aware of how fast the world can change. This is another great metaphor for humility. This is a visual metaphor. You're all going to recognize the technology in this clip, but it was brand new at your 70th anniversary, and it was the desktop computer. Well, let's just watch how this individual dealt with this new technology 30 years ago. I showed that to my teenagers a while back, and they're just like, well, that's dumb, Dad. They had no idea what a manual typewriter was, so the whole dang joke was lost on them. But it is easy for us to laugh at that now, but I still think a lot of us look at some of these new technologies and go, ridiculous, that's not going to happen. And let me tell you about a technology I haven't yet really addressed. I mentioned it earlier, but that is virtual reality. And my guess is a lot of you are looking at that's ridiculous. How many of you have tried virtual reality? So it looks like about 25% of you. So this is a wearable technology. You put the goggles on, and it feels as like you are wherever the goggles are showing you to be. Those of you who have not yet experienced virtual reality, let me try and give you a sense of what it's all about. This grandma is watching Jurassic Park. So she feels as though she's in a park with dinosaurs. Let's see how it feels. So apparently it's pretty good. But now again, I suspect that some of you might be saying, well, it might be good for my video gaming son or grandson, or maybe to watch a movie, but I'm in the serious business of construction. It has no practical application for me. Well, let me just show you how one of your, this comes from Mortenson, it's a Minnesota-based construction company, how they're already leveraging virtual reality.
And of all projects, a hospital project is one of the most complex when it comes to putting MEP work in place. So by looking at the helmet today and seeing those scopes in the context of where they were going in, it was really interesting to see what was installed and what's going to be installed tomorrow, from electrical to plumbing to ductwork.
So again, you might think virtual reality is ridiculous, but others in your industry don't, and they're leveraging this technology to increase the productivity and the safety of their workers today. But my broader point, like every other technology, it's only going to get better and ultimately more affordable, and you should be thinking about how to leverage these tools sooner rather than later. One last act that requires a little humility, but I think it'll really position you for our future success is this. As I look around the room, many of you are my peers, and by all means, continue to mentor younger people in the industry. But in a world that's changing as fast as ours, those of us who are a little bit older are going to have to pivot 180 degrees and get reverse mentors. People who are younger than us, who have less experience. Why? Because they see the world from a different perspective. I'm going to give you a little test as to whether you'd benefit from a reverse mentor. I recently came across this. This is on an entrance exam to a kindergarten. I didn't know kindergartens had entrance exams, but apparently some of them do, and the 5-year-olds had 20 seconds to determine what parking spot number that car was in. Since you're all a little older, I'm only going to give you 15 seconds, but see if you can figure it out. And if you can, keep the answer to yourself. But what parking spot number is that car in? Okay, how many people are confident of their answer? And typically about 10% are, and what is it, someone? Yeah, it's 87. And what did it require you to do? All you had to do is just flip it upside down. Now here's the irony. 100% of the 5-year-olds all figured it out. They all got into kindergarten. My guess is many of you were saying, well, I'm a smart person. There's just some mathematical formula. I'll figure it out. It's 2x minus 2. But here's my point. People with more experience, sometimes we get so locked into seeing our industry from one perspective that we've been seeing it from that perspective for 25, 30, or 40 years, that sometimes what we benefit from is someone with less experience who is younger. Why? Because they see the world from a different perspective with fresh eyes. But my point to you is if you don't have a reverse mentor, I cannot encourage you strongly enough to get one. And maybe it's something that AWCI could actually look at formalizing, have a reverse mentor program. The younger people still need mentoring, but you're also then grooming leaders for the next century as well. But now I'm going to begin wrapping up, and to do that I'm going to see how close all of you are paying attention to my presentation. So I'm going to ask everyone to stand up. What I want you to do is I want you to watch me as closely as possible. And I want you to do exactly as I do, okay? Everyone put your hands up, put your hands out just a little bit, wiggle those fingers. Now clap your hands together. Okay, flip your hands over, so they should be flipped all the way over, okay? Now take your right hand and put it over your left. Everyone, this is your right hand, even here in Florida. Okay, very good. Now lock those fingers together. Okay, now lower your arms, and now tap those index fingers together. Okay, so do you all promise you are watching closely? Because if you're all watching, 100% of you, every single person in this room, should be able to quickly, simply, and elegantly, and without moving your shoulders, rotate those fingers 180 degrees to the top like a pistol. Thumbs up here, quickly. Can't move your hands after the fact, sir. There are a few of you who got it, but are most of you, it looks like 98% of you are somehow suspiciously locked up, right? All right, have a seat. I'm going to show you what just happened, but if you ended up locked up, and 98% of you did end up locked up, I want you to acknowledge, clearly I did something of which you were not aware. And you should have some humility to the idea that even though you were watching me closely, you missed something. I'm now going to show you the trick, and then I'm going to tell you why I show you the trick. I know if I don't show you the trick, half of you are going to be under the table for the next couple of minutes like, how did that guy do that? Dang him. So here's the trick, and you can go back and do it with your colleagues when you get back. The trick is this. You say, watch me as closely as possible, do exactly as I do. Put your hands up, put your hands out, wiggle your fingers, clap your hands together, flip your hands over, take your right hand, put it over your left. Everyone does that right, but here comes the trick. You might remember I acted as though someone here in Florida did it wrong, and I physically moved my right hand out here. Most of you tracked that with your eyes. As you were distracted, I used that distraction to flip my other hand that way, which allowed me when I came back to do that. But if you don't see it, and most of you didn't see it, you end up locked up. So, why do I go to the trouble of showing you this trick? Here's why. Here's the one thing I know for certain as a futurist, and it's this. It's after I leave here today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next decade, next 100 years, your and our world is going to change again. But if we don't pick up on these changes, what's going to happen to us? We're going to end up locked up, inflexible, and like Blockbuster. And that's not where we want to be. But if we do pick up on these changes, we're going to be flexible, adaptable enough to steer ourselves, our business, and our industry into the future. So that's a really long way to segue into the final A of the big aha, and that stands for action. And because this is your centennial celebration, I'm just going to focus on one action. As leaders in this industry, I need you to regularly take time to think about the future of your industry. And I'm going to give you a simple way to do this. I call it my Future 15. Every Friday at 4:45, just take 15 minutes to focus on the future. Lift your head up from the daily grind. Read, think, and reflect on how your world is changing and how you might be able to leverage those changes to transform your industry. And I'm going to share with AWCI, I have it's a one-page document. It's called my Think Week Resource Guide. Really great websites, individuals I follow, other periodicals that if you're looking for information on how your world is changing, it'll be in this one-page document. So I will share that with the association, along with an entire copy of this presentation. But here are just a couple things I think you should be thinking about. This is a new little company, just received some funding just 5 weeks ago. It's called Doxel, but here's what it does. It uses robotic technology to scan, to go into construction sites, and then using camera and LiDAR technology, it sort of looks at the work that has been done at the end of the day, and then it does this. So if anything is out of tolerance, it spots it by the end of the day. Frequently, sometimes those things go undetected for weeks on end. And then when they are detected, it is a costly retrofit. But maybe some of you should be thinking about how to leverage that technology. It's making one construction company, it's increasing their productivity by 38%. If you're having trouble finding more new workers, well, maybe one of the solutions is to become more productive by leveraging this existing technology. Here's another material someone should be spending some time thinking about. It's a company out in Stanford, at Stanford University. It's called SkyCool. It's a new nano material. You just layer it on the top of buildings, and to make a long story short, it keeps those buildings cool, or it reduces the HVAC cost by 20%. So suddenly, a simple advance in material science is going to transform the HVAC industry. Other advances in nanotechnology, the idea of making solar paint, literally paint that you just put onto a wall and it converts it to a solar cell. We're not there yet, but it's getting dangerously good. But think about what that opens up for your industry. Suddenly, it's no longer just a wall, it is an energy source. Bad news for the utility industry, I'd argue great news for your industry. How do you leverage these things? But after you do all of this thinking, take time to think twice. How many of you see two other words embedded directly in think twice? Yeah, I heard it. It is thin ice. And I'm here to tell you, whether we like it or not, we're all on thinner ice than we appreciate. All of our worlds could change really, really quickly. And here's just another advance in nanotechnology that researchers over in Switzerland are working on. So essentially, they're creating self-healing concrete. It's no longer science fiction, it's science fact, and these technologies are getting really good. But after you do all this thinking, we need to think harder. Here's a technology that some of you might need to be aware of. It's a 3D printed, it's called Cool Brick. It's using 3D printers to print bricks, but it's using evaporative cooling to help keep buildings significantly cooler, again, without any use of refrigeration or HVAC technology. But after we do all this thinking, let's take time to think differently about the future. Up in Toronto, Google is partnering with another company, and they're trying to build a city block from the internet up. They're saying, look, the future is going to be different, and that's going to allow us to build things differently. And I think that that's really innovative, but watch what they're doing over in Dubai, how they're thinking about advances in robotic technology, new material technology. They're thinking about our buildings might be able to do things differently. Even our walls are going to be able to do things differently.
Then imagine watching the sun rise and set from the same living room window. Program your home to rotate with the sun throughout the day or stay in the shade. Your view will always be yours to customize for a price.
But it's not just a concept, they're working on it.
That's the vision of David Fisher, who's planning the world's first rotating skyscraper in Dubai.
The Dubai Tower is the first building designed in 4 dimensions. In other words, the first building that continued to change its shape, it never looked the same.
I think what's really exciting, especially at a centennial anniversary, if you can't give yourself permission to think really different about the future at this time, I don't know when you can. But just try to imagine the possible changes that your industry could see in the next 100 years. And I think we're seeing the early signs today. It's going to be a remarkable future. But now let me end on this note, because it's how I want you to think about the future, and I want to tie together the principles of awareness, humility, and action. And so I'm going to give away another copy of a book I wrote a while ago. This is called Higher Unlearning. But here's the question I'm going to ask. So what I want all of you to do is I want you to just picture a pond. And for the sake of argument, let's say it's the size of this ballroom. And let's further assume it's next week and it's the first day of April. So on the first day of April, there's a single lily pad. It's actually really, really tiny, but it doubles every day in April. So on April 2nd, there'd be 2. The next day, the 3rd, there are 4. But then the day after that, we go to 8, then 16, 32, 64. You get the idea. And this lily pad keeps on doubling. And on the last day of April, suddenly it fills up this whole pond. Can everyone kind of picture that exponential growth? So here's the question. And I'm going to give the book to whoever gets the answer within 1%. On day 20, so 2/3 of the way through this doubling, how much of the pond would be covered with lily pads? Just shout out some guesses. I'm going to give the book to whoever gets within 1. 100%? No? 100%? No? No, I thought I heard someone say a really low number. Did someone say a really low number over here? Yes, sir. 1%? You are within 1%. Congratulations, sir. Do you know the more mathematically precise answer? You still win the book. The mathematically precise answer, I mean, most people do guess 100%, 50%, 78%. Well, the answer is 1/10 of 1%. Now, undoubtedly, a lot of you are going, what do you mean? You just spent the last 55 minutes telling me how fast all of those technologies are doubling, and you just said the lily pad was doubling, but it only covers 1/10 of 1% on day 20? Yeah. In fact, this is exactly what I'm trying to tell you, because at the beginning, what else did I say? If something doubles 10 times, it could be 10 additional times, which is exactly what happens from day 20 to day 30. How much bigger does something get after 10 doublings? Anyone remember? 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. Gets 1,000 times bigger. So by day 10, there were 1,000 lily pads. Day 20, there were 1,000,000, but we were ultimately headed towards 1 billion. So it's not until day 25 that we get a little over 3%. Not until day 29 that we get to 50, but once we get to 50, boom! The next day, the whole thing is changed. Why do I show you this? Well, I suspect that some of you are still saying to yourself, well, Mr. Future Man, if the world's changing as fast as you say it is, how come my world feels pretty much the same? My message to you is this. Every technology I've told you about has, in fact, been doubling. What you need to appreciate, we're just at day 20. The really big change is just ahead of us. This is the change we need to be aware of. This amount of change requires humility, but it demands that we do something. So I know I've just dropped a really big bomb on you. A lot of you are probably looking at your watch going, man, what time is cocktail hour? My head just hurts from all of this. But I want to give you hope, optimism, and confidence you're going to be able to handle this future. And do you know why I'm so confident? Because you've already done it. I gave you that earlier example of the 56K modem. Handled that 1,000-fold increase fine. Let me give you another one. This is from maybe your 75th anniversary. But how many of you can remember the hit movie from the early 90s, Wall Street? Any of you remember that movie? Then they showed this guy using that device. I mean, Michael Douglas played Gordon Gekko. He was this high-powered, wealthy guy, but to show he's a high-powered, wealthy guy, they showed him using that brick-like monstrosity. That was the Motorola Dynatec 8000X. It cost $5,000. It only made telephone calls, and it belonged to less than 1/10 of 1% of the global population. All that technology has done over the last 25 years is, like that lily pad, exploded out. And again, to help you understand how weird the future is going to be, sometimes it does help to appreciate how weird things are today. I came across this photo recently. This is a homeless fellow now using a smartphone to accept digital donations. Now, my point here is not to poke fun at the homeless. It is to remind us that technology has this curious way of getting better, faster, and more powerful. And at the beginning of this presentation, I showed you Samsung's new wall. It is ridiculously expensive. But in 25 years' time, what might that technology be like? And how many people might be able to afford it? And how might your industry then change in this future? We are going to see a lot of change. But now, I know that there are still skeptics in the audience. And I want to go back to your 50th anniversary. I was actually born in 1964. But in 1967, one of the most popular shows was The Jetsons, which then begs the question, hey, dude, where are all my flying cars? My guess is at the 50th anniversary, we would have said, oh, by 2018, we're going to have flying cars. Well, we didn't. But, and here's the irony, on the exact day of your 100th anniversary, March 11th, 2018, here's what happened down in New Zealand. And it's a US company.
Like a helicopter, KATERRA takes off and lands vertically. So it doesn't need a runway or an airport. But unlike a helicopter, KATERRA is remarkably quiet. KATERRA can fly faster than 100.
At day 20. That technology is going to get better, and the future is going to be, from my perspective, unbelievable. So what's next? As a futurist, I don't claim to predict the future. I'm going to end on this note, that there is a great quote. It comes from a fellow by the name of Peter Drucker, and he said, the only way to predict the future is to create it yourself. And for 100 years, that's exactly what your industry has been doing. You've been embracing tools and technologies to do things differently, but those of you with the courage and the foresight to continue to embrace all of these tools and technologies and trends, but to do things differently, your future for the next 100 years is going to be unbelievably bright. So again, congratulations and happy 100th anniversary. I'm looking forward to the next 100 years.